Welcome. This is James Corbett of CorbettReport.com.
And this is James Evan Pilato of MediaMonarchy.com, and we both welcome you back to another episode of The New World Next Week, which, of course, you can find all the pertinent information and all the files, audio, video, and otherwise at newworldnextweek.com. And we've been a bit remiss in mentioning the huge thanks to ParadigmShift.tv, which gets this shown essentially all around the world, James. And we are going to go all around the world on this episode 107 of New World Next Week. And it seems as though it's murder and mayhem as we look around the globe, from not only here in the States, but the story playing out that I've seen all day, slathered all over the news, as, again, I come to you on March 21st, 2012, as the French close in on this gunman. And it's basically been the show all day, James, is... Again, we're waiting for them to crash into the church as the world awaits, to get that bad guy. However, let's begin our trip around the world with a posting I have on cyberspacewar.com that comes from the Associated Press. In Sweden, cash is king no more. Sweden was the first European country to introduce banknotes in 1661. Now it's come farther than most on the path toward getting rid of them. I can't see why we should be printing banknotes at all anymore, says Bjorn Ulvaeus, former member of 1970s pop group ABBA and a vocal proponent for a world without cash. The contours of such a society are starting to take shape in this high-tech nation, frustrating those who prefer coins and bills over digital money. In most Swedish cities, public buses don't accept cash. Tickets are prepaid or purchased with a cell phone text message. A small but growing number of businesses only take cards, and some bank offices, which, of course, this is the key note here, which make money on electronic transactions, have stopped handling cash altogether. There are towns where it isn't at all possible anymore to enter a bank and use cash, complains Kurt Persson, chairman of the Sweden's National Pensioners Organization. He says that's a problem for elderly people in rural areas who don't have credit cards, who don't know how to use them to withdraw cash. The decline of cash is noticeable even in houses of worship, like the Carl Gustaf Church in southern Sweden, where Vicar Johan Tierberg recently installed a card reader to make it easier for worshipers to make offerings. People come up several times and said they didn't have cash but would still like to donate money, Tierberg says. In closing, bills and coins represent only 3% of Sweden's economy, compared to an average of 9% in the Eurozone and 7% in the U.S., according to the fine folks at the Bank for International Settlements, an umbrella organization for the world's central banks. 3% is still too much if you ask Ulvaeus. A cashless society may seem like an odd cause for someone who made a fortune on Money, Money, Money and other ABBA hits. But for Bjorn, it's a matter of security. James, when we were bouncing around story ideas earlier, I made kind of the joke on this one. I was like, oh, you had me at, 70s pop star. But this story really does have basically all the elements of the police state. You got, the money changers in the church. You got the technology. You've got, the pop culture situations and geopolitics in general. What's your take on this story, James?
Oh my God, James, do you use cash anymore? That's like so 20th century. It's disgusting. I mean, who wants to use cash anyways? Who wants a non-government trackable anonymous payment system? What a ridiculous, outdated idea that is. I want everything I do to be tracked and traced and databased at all times. and besides, cash has lots of germs on it. That's so gross. I don't want to touch things like that. The royalty don't carry around cash because they don't have to touch stuff like that. That's why they haven't touched money for the last several centuries. So I want to be superior like royalty. When they get just embedded in my wrist, it's going to be so great. Or maybe my forehead. That's going to be awesome. Yeah. Unfortunately, I'm not even really joking about that. I mean, people, please look it up. I mean, there's been this ridiculous campaign about how, cash is so dirty and so many bugs are traveled on cash, so it's better to use cards anyway, and things like this in the last few years. But people might remember Peter Aliff, the head of Visa Europe, came out back, I think in 2007, and said, by 2012, we're going to be really transitioned into a cashless society and all of this stuff. So unfortunately, we've seen the build up to this for years and years and years and years and years. But as I've said before, I'm so glad that Japan is still basically a cash society, and you don't generally use credit cards or plastic for any everyday transactions. But I know every time I go back to Canada, I'm just amazed. Everybody is constantly using their debit or their credit for everything, and it's quite disturbing and disgusting in so many ways. But what's it like there in Portland?
I know, at least personally, it's hard not to kind of fall victim to doing that. And what I'd have to try and make myself do is take out cash so that I have some petty cash in my wallet. It used to be easier actually back in the bartending and table waiting days, because you got cash tips and you'd pretty much cash yourself out at night. And I would usually upscale the bill, so I would have a large kind of unbreakable bill that I wasn't going to go spend and kind of fritter away. I'd have $100 bills that I would just kind of put away and then pay rent in cash. But no, it's so easy to do it because all the credit card companies have leaned on all the convenience stores and all the cafes to not charge the fees for doing little petty transactions.
And now they say you're a terrorist if you use cash, so there's that added joy.
If you're using cash at internet coffee bars, that's the biggest sign. That's the homegrown errorism, isn't it?
Unfortunately so. What do we have up next?
Well, as we continue around the world, from Reuters, U.S. dangles secret data for Russian missile shield approval. The Obama administration's leaving open the possibility of giving Moscow certain secret data on U.S. interceptor missiles due to help protect Europe from any Iranian missile strikes. A deal is being sought by Washington that could include classified data exchange because it's in the U.S. interest to enlist Russia and its radar stations in the missile defense effort. A Pentagon spokeswoman said Tuesday, March 20th, in written replies to Reuters. No decision has been made yet on whether the United States would offer data about the interceptor's velocity at burnout, or VBO, said Air Force Lieutenant Colonel April Cunningham, the spokeswoman, but is not being ruled out. VBO, that's velocity at burnout, is at the heart of what Russia wants as the price for its cooperation, said Ricky Ellison, head of Private Missile Defense Advocacy Alliance, which has close ties to missile defense and military officials. VBO tells how fast an interceptor is going when its rocket booster motor fuel is spent and the motor burns out. With VBO and certain other technical data, Moscow could more readily develop countermeasures and strategies to defeat the system and transfer the information to others. The department emphasized the Obama administration was following in the footsteps of the George W. Bush administration in seeking missile defense cooperation with Moscow, a process formally begun in 2004. And James, of course, we know that's not the only way they're following in the Bush crime family footsteps. But I'll throw you one related story to this from NPR. On Persian New Year, Obama tries to pierce Iran's electronic curtain, basically saying, well, the Iranian people, they need internet freedom. So, of course, James, we're going to give them some freedom software so they can have the promise, if you will, of a free internet. James.
Yes, as we carry the torch of liberty and freedom around the world and at the point of a gun. What I find interesting about this story is what I find interesting about that Stratfor leak that came out a while ago about Russia and Israel swapping data codes. And again, Stratfor leaks are not worth the price, or not worth the paper they're not written on, because they're just rumors, sold to the company for the sake of generating more rumors. So who knows if it's true or not, but allegedly Russia and Israel had this agreement to swap data codes so that Russia could hack into Israeli-supplied Georgian drones and Israel could hack into the Iranian air missile defense, which is supplied from Russia. And they had this agreement, supposedly. And here we have this idea, well, if the U.S. gives this VBO data to Russia, then they can it can assuage the idea that this is going to be used against Russia. But it goes to show the point at the deeper level that once we get into this technological war where we eliminate the human equation altogether, and as we move further and further towards these drone armies and everything, I mean, truly, the entire system, an entire war can be utterly and completely staged behind the scenes. I mean, if you have someone like a Putin and an Obama getting together to do what rulers in the past have demonstrably done. We used to have royalty writing to their cousin in Europe saying, "Oh, my peasants are getting uppity. I think we need to have a war." So they agreed to go to war together. And of course, neither of the kings are going to get hurt, so they don't care. And in the same way, I mean, we're moving into the system where literally you could have two leaders deciding behind the scenes, let's just start a war. It'll help things out in the domestic agenda, whatever. And they swap the drone codes or whatever, so they can make sure they can absolutely puppeteer every stage of that war. It's getting into that bizarre level of things. So I mean, everything is staged and everything is set up, but this makes it even more so. So it's just kind of mind-boggling to think about it at that level.
Well, and I think what you were kind of hinting at there is something I see show up in more and more news articles that kind of begin with, "It may sound like something out of a B Hollywood movie script," and yet here we are. You, James, also helped set the table for our third and final story this week, as you talked about all of them coming together in happy family fashion. We take it from, again, the Associated Press and the Washington Post. In echo of Cold War tension with North Korea, Obama to visit Demilitarized Zone next week. Amid new tension with North Korea over a planned rocket launch, President Barack Obama plans to visit the Demilitarized Zone, the DMZ, if you will, separating North and South Korea at the start of an international trip next week, the White House said this past Tuesday. Sunday's trip to the most heavily defended border in the world carries obvious Cold War symbolism as Obama tries to foster new nuclear disarmament talks with North Korea. Although U.S. officials regularly go to the DMZ, the presidential visit is likely to be read by the North as a special show of strength to its new untested leader, Kim Jong-un. The DMZ is the front line of democracy in the Korean Peninsula and a symbol of U.S. unity with military ally South Korea, said Daniel Russell, Asia Director for the White House National Security Council. A visit by the president there to see and to thank the U.S. and the South Korean service members makes perfect sense. Obama aides noted that, of course, the visit comes almost exactly 2 years after the sinking of a South Korean warship, which Seoul and Washington blame on the North. Obama will visit some of the approximately 28,500 U.S. troops stationed in South Korea as a legacy of the Korean War 6 decades ago. The DMZ trip is his first stop on a 3-day visit to Seoul, South Korea, for an international summit on keeping nuclear weapons materials out of the hands of terrorists. The gathering of more than 50 nations is intended to take stock of progress toward Obama's goal of locking down nuclear material around the world by 2014. Despite some progress by known nuclear nations, the goal of complete security is far distant. It is also overshadowed by North Korea's nuclear brinksmanship and fears that Iran could soon build a nuclear weapon. James, as we're starting to run out of time here, which spooky boogeyman would you like to poke holes in first there?
Well, actually, the North Korean situation is interesting to me because it seems like, contrary to what I just said, this is one of those situations that doesn't seem set up or puppeteered, other than the fact that I think China likes to keep their relationship with North Korea as kind of ace card up their sleeve, like they're keeping the madman under control, so you better watch out what you do with us. But no, I think there's genuinely a madman running North Korea, and it's so far out of the political calculus of what can be puppeteered that I think that's why it's always brushed to the side. So we've pointed out before the hypocrisy of thinking about Iran and not thinking about North Korea when North Korea has the nukes and they're willing to use them and they're doing these missile tests and they're just constantly provoking, and yet not a word in the media about North Korea and what a threat it is. So just hypocrisy, and I think we understand why, because it's genuinely out of their hands.
As we wrap up this episode, James, I just want to make a quick mention. I have taken a hiatus for the last probably about a month and a half from my weekly live podcast, but I will be returning to the airwaves with episode 251 this Friday, March 23rd, exclusively, or at least the source of origin. And of course, the podcast and iTunes and all those things are there on MediaMonarchy.com. But we're relaunching on revereradio.net. So I'm super excited, and I hope all the folks out there will join me for the Real News Remixed.
Awesome news. Looking forward to it. And we're recording this Wednesday night North American time. Of course, this will be released Thursday North American time, which means that tonight, Corbett Report Radio, Food World Order, James Evan Pilato will be on for the last half of the show. So tune in for that.
All right, man. Thank you so much. Take care.
You too.